Life story.
A few years ago, I had to participate in the funeral of a relative. The last desire of the deceased was to bury him not in a cramped city cemetery with a noisy highway behind a fence, but in his native remote village with old wooden houses, with a giant puddle in the middle of a single overgrown road, in which joyful geese are splashing. It was very difficult to get the coffin there. The village is far away from popular routes, and the quality of the road was terrible. But when we arrived at the place, I fully understood the decision of the deceased. The village cemetery turned out to be a most beautiful place, bright and poetic. The tombstones stood in a small grove, translucent through the rays of the sun. Soft birch twigs affectionately touched the face. Not far away, a herd of cows and a shepherd walked peacefully. There was no hint of the cemetery authorities. There was no need to buy a plot, to find out something with someone and crowd around. The peasants from the village, who remembered the deceased, helped to dig a grave in a free place. Not a single person there had any nasty things on their minds. Everyone saw off their relative on their last journey with love and bright memory. And since then I have been living with a strong feeling. Why, in fact, should our cemetery scare? Are there any vampires buried there? There are different people in the world, but most often they are our dear grandparents. And I calmly walk through the cemeteries, looking at the faces in the photographs, trying to imagine what kind of life these people lived. So one day I walk on a sunny day. I'm not in a hurry, everything around is blooming, squirrels with ravens are jumping on the tombstones. She glanced at several of her familiar graves. Here is a handsome brunette with piercing burning eyes, who passed away at the age of 40. I think, probably, he loved a cheerful life. Something went wrong. Here are the old people buried in the 20th year, I think with sadness. Maybe it was a wave of COVID that took people away. And here is a family burial from the 70s, a man, a woman and, apparently, their son, a young guy in uniform. The first to leave was the son, in the same year the mother, the father 7 years later. At the same time, the parents in the photographs can no longer be said to be young. Probably, their son was late, which means, as it happens in such cases, even more beloved. What happened, I think? Looks like something happened to the guy. The mother could not stand it, and then the father broke down. For the longest time I looked at the tombstone of a woman. She had such an open, kind face. If something tragic happened to a guy, he may not have had time to understand everything. My father stayed there for some more years, but my mother was mowed down right away. With what grief she probably lived out her last days, how tears filled her eyes when she opened them in the morning. I stood by the fence and in my thoughts wished all three of them an easy life in another world, so that they would never have to cry again. I had a single candy lying around in my pocket and I decided to put it on the woman's grave. Meanwhile, my daily life was seething with events. At work, I met a man, an intelligent and interesting person, began to call to relax in nature with him and with one married couple. In general, I don't have the habit of seeing a maniac in everyone I meet, but here, for some reason, I felt a little uncomfortable. He seems to be good, but there was some 1 minute when a sharp cold gleam suddenly appeared in his eyes and he said something frankly rude. Then he immediately remembered, smiled, laughed it off, as if he was pulling the mask back in a hurry. It didn't happen every day, but it did happen again. The lack of communication and male attention nevertheless began to take its toll. This man knew how to be interesting, and the offer to ride on the lakes was pleasant in itself. And one fine evening, climbing under the covers and turning off the night light in my single apartment, I decided that it's enough to sort through the stories from crime in your memory. You must agree and don't fill your head with nonsense. I woke up that night in some kind of warm haze, as if in the air on the sea beach. She lay like that for a couple of seconds, not understanding anything, although without fear. She lifted her head and began to twist it around. And suddenly, as if in the same light haze, I saw a woman. If someone had described this to me in advance, I would have been sure that at such a moment I would have peed from fear. But the strange thing is, contrary to all logic, I was not afraid. Gradually, the woman's face became clearer. I couldn't figure out if I knew her or not. But for some reason she seemed very dear to me. And she looked at me with real compassion in sad eyes on a kind sad face. I don't know how much time passed like that, maybe 2 minutes, maybe 10, they sat like that and looked at each other. And only at the very end, how would it be better to say it, not even her voice sounded in my head, but some kind of silent understanding appeared.
Why are you with him somewhere? He is evil and heartless.
Don't even talk to him. And after that, it was as if I was gently turned off into a dream. After waking up, it finally dawned on me that I had seen a woman on the tombstone of a family grave in the village cemetery. A chill went down my spine, not from her appearance itself, but from her advice. Was, I think, this type seems strange to me too. I tried to merge as politely as possible from the correspondence, and here it was not without his outbursts of aggression, which he again immediately tried to hush up. After a while, everything calmed down and was forgotten. And then colleagues told a wonderful story. As it suddenly turned out, the peasant had been consoling himself all this time with some kind of mistress. Apparently, one was not enough for him. And now the mistress safely drove off to the hospital with several broken bones with his active help. The man turned out to be an everyday sadist who knew how to smile sweetly in public. These are the things, dear ones, the dead are much kinder than the living.